Audit channels. For a niche of YouTube channel that makes up a tiny proportion of drone flights in the UK, let alone the world, these channels get a lot of attention. Since I launched Geeksvana and started our UK drone rule series of videos, which has included interviewing the CAAR airspace regulator and even making content in collaboration with the police, we have been contacted by a lot of viewers asking my opinion on the interactions these audit channels have with the police and security. Many will ask my opinion on how the officer handled things, often looking for answers as to why a police officer acted so heavy-handed, and some want to see a way of stopping the audit channels from potentially damaging the hobby and what they see as wasting police resources. As I create content focused on what the drone rules are and how to fly within them, this of course doesn't surprise me. It's natural that people would want to know my opinion. Usually I do not give my opinions on other content creators, and apart from a few exceptions covered in our news videos, I try not to criticise specific drone flights or pilots. The main reason for this is that I simply do not see it as my place to judge anyone. The main reason I create content around the UK, EU and US drone rules is because when I first started out flying drones as a hobbyist, there simply wasn't the content out there which I felt gave me actual answers and helped me fly my drone in more places. Instead, I could only get grey area responses and hypothetical examples. The raw videos I produce are intended to give you, the audience, the information you need, and that's it. What you do with that information and how you fly is down to all of us as individuals to decide. Also, in terms of my work as a journalist for the channel, I try to keep as impartial as possible so I can get to the facts of a story and present the potential points of view of each side. When I watch a typical UK audit channel fly their drone and either police, security or a landowner react negatively, I try to assess it not just in terms of what I can see on screen, but also what you cannot see or perhaps are not shown, but more on that in a minute. So here you have a hot topic within the UK drone hobby at the moment, meaning it should be something I have no issue with creating a video on. It certainly has all the areas that my channel deals with. Drone flight, check. Enforcement of drone rules, check. So why has this video taken me so long to make? And why have I deleted more versions of this video than any other? I've recorded this video a dozen times over many months with completely different scripts, and each time I do, the final content I'm left with just doesn't deal with the topic in a way that I'm completely happy with. I'm not here to criticize someone else's content on YouTube. If I don't like it, then I don't need to watch it. I'm also not willing to cast aspersions about someone's background or make sweeping generalizations about either the auditor or the authority involved. In my opinion, a lot of hate, a lot of prejudice and discrimination hides in topics like this. People with extreme views latch onto topics so they can forward their agenda, which has nothing to do with the topic actually being discussed. I see this on both sides of the auditor issue, as it were, from supporters and those against the channels. So I'm also keen to discuss the core of the issue as it is to me, which is the use of drones by audit channels and whether or not that part of their work could end up impacting the drone hobby negatively. To get there, we need to cover a few points. As with any story I cover, I have researched the background and surrounding information deeply. I've spoken to a number of audit channels, some specifically about this video, and I've gained opinion and information from law enforcement, not just here in the UK, but opinions and background from further afield as well. We have audit channels who are viewers of Geeksvana, who interact in our live show chats and are even kind enough to share our content. I'm always keen that my channel brings people together to have a healthy discussion on key topics. And as long as those views can be expressed without seeking to be offensive, views from any side of a story are welcome here. Because if we sit and cast aspersions at others in the hobby and industry, creating division between factions and groups, then what actually happens is we end up giving those who would like to see the hobby drone flights restricted out of existence what they want, a fragmented hobby that cannot defend itself. So for the purposes of this video and this discussion, we need to separate the content audit channels produce and their use of drones whilst making that content. If you're unsure what an audit channel actually is, they are content creators who supposedly audit the activities of authorities such as police and government, as well as check out privately owned locations in terms of finding out what is there, all whilst exercising their rights as members of the UK public to do so. There is nothing that an average audit channel does that any member of the public couldn't do. That's part of the embryo of the idea, really. How would police or authorities treat people in XYZ scenarios? It isn't my cup of tea or the kind of thing I spend time watching on YouTube, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. As I said, potential waste of resources aside, which really does get me angry, if you don't like something, then don't watch it. However, in my opinion, this initial concept of auditing is completely lost, and instead we get provoked reactions and set up situations to gain clicks, at which point you're not really auditing anything. As with anything in life, there are those audit channels who carry themselves very well and approach the entire subject matter professionally, and there are those who seem only intent on winding up authorities to get a reaction and a clickable thumbnail. In these latter scenarios, you are getting an extreme response from provocation, and I do not think it fairly represents how police or security would deal with someone approaching them. I mentioned before about needing to assess what we do not see on screen. To me, this is vital when assessing the motivations and intentions of creators calling themselves audit channels and the motivation behind the reaction they receive. So we need to spend just a minute on this because it is important for context. If you or I were out flying our drone in public, then it is unlikely we would actively conceal our identity. Also, where we take off from might be more about the safest and smartest place to do so in terms of our drone flight and not getting noticed as much as possible by a police officer or security, etc. One thing you do not see in these audit videos is, of course, the presenter. Often, when they are filming their content, an audit channel will take every possible step to conceal their identity, including covering their heads completely in a balaclava, hoodie, etc. Now, I understand the context here. They, by the very nature of the videos they make, do not want or feel they should identify themselves in any way. And this is a tactic sometimes used by journalists who fear repercussions from authorities. However, I want you to now put yourself in the shoes of a police officer or security guard or landowner. Imagine you're returning to the police station, etc., and are presented by someone clearly flying a drone who is completely and utterly obscuring their identity. The person has their head completely covered by scarves or a balaclava, etc., and they're stood right at the vehicle or pedestrian access to a police station or sensitive location. All this time with the drone hovering over the car park or the station itself. I would put it to you that the first thoughts of that police officer are not, is this guy flying his drone legally, or frankly, anything specifically related to the drone flight itself. We live in a sometimes very scary world, and threat assessments against police stations and sensitive locations are being revised constantly. It is naive, in my opinion, to expect a completely calm response from a police officer or security when they are presented by the sight of a person at their gates to a sensitive location, etc., flying a drone and often concealing their identity from cameras. I've never taken part in or have any experience of police and security training, but it wouldn't seem unreasonable to me that the very people they are most concerned about in sensitive locations would be those actively concealing their identity for no apparent reason. This doesn't mean the auditors are not allowed to do so, but it also doesn't mean I would walk into a bank deliberately dressed like a cartoon bank robber and expect a calm response from the tellers. But that is the point here. Many audit channels will choose the most provocative appearance, the most controversial spot to stand and hover their drone directly above the sensitive location. This is intended to provoke a reaction. Then you take things a step further on. The officer or authority approach and ask them what they're doing, why they're flying their drone at that location. The response from many auditors at this point is one of defiance and indignation, refusing to give any details and just simply parrot they have the right to fly their drone there and have the right to conceal their identity and personal details, etc. My point is that none of these interactions that audit channels have with police, authorities, security or landowners are what the average UK citizen would probably get when out flying their drone. This is why such reports outside of the videos posted by auditors are actually rare. In fact, most viewers who contact Geeksvana who have had issues with the police in the UK and in fact over in the US are often dealing with police reactions to neighbours or witnesses calling them in complaint to their drone flight, so sometimes several days afterwards. To me, this is where the audit part of these videos starts to fall down a little bit. An audit channel is supposed to be auditing authorities, and they are trying to expose and highlight where, in particular, police are treating people unfairly. Be warned, public in general, because this is how police will treat you when you're flying your drone. To me, turning up to a police station dressed in a way that will knowingly wind officers up is not auditing anything. It turns into almost a prank show, seeing where the pressure points are to get the reaction and content they're looking for. And the tactics used by auditors to provoke people is one of the reasons why I have remained silent on this topic for so long, apart from not being able to find the right message that accurately conveys my thoughts, hence the deleted videos. Up until this point, I have chosen to stay mainly silent on the topic because to me, an audit channel using a drone is not the same as one of my average viewers flying their own drone out in public. So the advice I hand out to viewers doesn't really include this type of activity. We're not inundated with videos showing drone hobbyists being slapped in cuffs by police here in the UK. There to me doesn't seem to be a particular issue in terms of the police reacting to drone flyers in general. My experience of dealing with the police both as a member of the public and in my work as a journalist leads me to believe they have greater priorities than worrying about where I am flying my Mini 2. The use of drones by audit channels is the extreme edge of the hobby. They're flying in locations and under circumstances where the average hobbyist is unlikely to find themselves. I've flown many hundreds of hours of drone flight and as of yet have not found cause to be flying over a police station, emergency situation or a prison, etc. Now, there is nothing saying those flights made by audit channels are not legal, and I'm not suggesting that. But equally, the response and reaction received from police and authorities is not what I would expect on a day-to-day interaction as a hobbyist out on a normal flight. If you chose to drive your car at the highest possible speed every day, then you would probably expect to crash your car more often. I see nothing different here. Fly your drone in as controversial location as possible regularly, and you will get more interactions with authorities. Now, this does not mean I'm suggesting that the police or security approaching the auditors whilst flying their drones should give anything but a professional response. In my opinion, unless the officer is 100% on the legislation, they should refer to others and seek support to help resolve the situation. Although you do have to take into account that the police in particular are trying to assess the situation in terms of potential threat to them, their colleagues and the public, so it isn't always easy to do so. If you take any profession that works under extreme stress and pressure and compound that with potentially serious and threatening situations, then you're going to get, by the very nature of the human condition, more officers reacting strongly to these situations. So to me, all the audit drone flyers are really proving to me is that police officers are human. Ask yourself, if someone was flying a drone outside your home and they had their head completely covered by a balaclava, etc., would you react? It does seem that some of the audit channels themselves are more interested in gaining a reaction for flying the drone rather than the footage the drone gets. We rarely seem to get any kind of analysis or audit of the footage that they actually gain. I did see a few videos that actually did this early on in this trend, but as soon as the auditors started getting an extreme reaction to their use of the drone itself, this seemed to vanish from many of the channels. If they're looking to audit the police station, then I would expect to see analysis of the movements or commentary about what the footage tells them in terms of the efficiency or work carried out by those at the station. The drone footage itself seems to feature only to serve as a provocation. As I said before, it only seems to audit that the police need to know the basics of the drone rules and that they are human beings. This does not mean that I agree with the actions of the police officers, security personnel and landowners in audit videos. The police in particular are quite rightly held to a much higher level of scrutiny and expectation by the public. In my opinion, if an officer is unsure of what the drone regulations are and they want to deal with someone flying a drone, they should know the legislation or have access to a point of reliable reference. Dispersing the information in an efficient and timely manner is obviously a challenge. Factor in as well that if you ask the average UK citizen what the priority should be, fighting violent crime, domestic abuse, etc., or spending a lot of resources educating officers quickly on the drone rules, and I know which one I would personally choose. So it will take some time for this to happen. It is not ideal, but it's a fact as I see it. It is impossible to give opinions on specific scenarios or react to individual videos sent to me by viewers because there are so many variables both in terms of the legislation surrounding the drone use and other issues at play. Also, you have to consider that these videos are usually edited, only give you one perspective. what happened before and after the filming finished. Also, as I mentioned earlier, there are many factors that are not shown to us that will bring about the resulting video. Overall, I think that drone use by the audit channels is a fad. It is a provocative way to engage police officers, security personnel, and landowners into conversation with the person stood at their gates. The lack of understanding around the drone rules and wider privacy means that you often end up with the authority figure knowing less than the drone pilot about the rules. Once this situation changes and more police and security understand the rules, there will be less space for misunderstanding and therefore less confrontation, at which point I would expect the audit channels to move on to new tactics to seek engagement. Although having watched many videos from these channels in preparation for this video, I can also report that many of the audit creators do not know the drone rules as well as they think they do. There almost seems to be a folklore surrounding some assertions where the theory has been repeated enough times that people seem to think it is now a fact. My advice to hobby flyers in general is to get to know the drone code and the legislation it is based on. The drone rules themselves are often open to interpretation, and some still require testing in court and appeal, so it is no real surprise that it is a rich subject matter in terms of gaining watchable conflict. But equally, if the rules were known, or at least the basics of it, by police and security personnel in general, there would be less confrontation. So at some point I would expect us to start seeing less and less drone flights on audit channels. But in the meantime, what impact are these flights and confrontations with authorities having on the drone hobby? Could we see a situation where new rules would be implemented to prevent these type of flights? Will, as the title of this video suggests, the audit channels ruin the drone hobby in the UK? For me, I don't think so, not in general, but there are some heavy caveats to my opinion on this topic, which I will explain. Overall, legal flight of drones should be supported. The CAA have implemented a raft of new regulations that tell us it no longer matters why you are flying the drone, but instead on the risk involved. The greater the risks, the more permissions you require. Flying a sub 250-gram drone in the UK allows you to fly in congested areas and even over people because the risk is assessed by the CAA to be minimal. When the dust settles on the confrontations between audit channels and authorities, then actually usually the right outcome in drone terms is often found. Once using a drone becomes as commonplace in interaction terms as driving a car, etc., then you'll see far less audit channels using them. I would perhaps a little provocatively suggest if driving an RC car past police stations got the same reaction from officers, then I think audit channels would start driving RC cars past police stations. My point is that once the novelty wears off, this will be less of an issue. To me, there is a greater danger presented to the hobby by those flying drones who either do not know the rules or who choose to ignore them completely, flying their drones at festivals and in flight restriction zones and making the headlines. Also, the out-and-out criminals using drones in many ways to enhance their illegal activity. These are very much present dangers to the hobby that far outweigh a few arguments between auditors and authorities. The reason we all talk about this so much is because the videos of drone confrontation currently get a large audience on social media, so it perhaps feels like a bigger issue than it actually is. Overall, we are of course talking about a handful of drone users, so I do not think the audit channel's use of drones will have a negative impact on the drone hobby. Over the past few months, I've had reason to speak to and interact with a number of creators, as I mentioned before, that are behind these channels, and I found a mix of desires and goals in mind with their content. In my opinion, many are not particularly interested in protecting the drone hobby and instead see drones as a gateway to enter discussions and confrontation with police officers and authorities who will often have less knowledge of the rules. The drone is a tool that creates the provocation, that brings the tension and conflict that seems to be required to get the views they seek. There were also those creators behind such channels who are very keen to know the rules and fly within them. This is both to protect themselves and the wider hobby. I've had several conversations with these creators in particular, and they were solely interested in ensuring they were flying correctly and within the rules. As I said before, there is a real mix of channel professionalism out there. It seems much like any niche on YouTube, there is a dramatic sliding scale of professionalism and intent with these audit channels, and the best have some very interesting content, that really does start to present sometimes fascinating commentary on the world we live in and how authorities police us. It is a niche of journalism and all niches should be protected, but responsibility to protect it should also be down to those engaging in it. All I ask is that the creators behind this type of content keep in mind that there is an important hobby and industry behind the drone that they are flying, and as their actions are in the public eye on social media, please protect the hobby by flying safely and responsibly. Outside of my research for this video and those videos sent to me by viewers, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I do not watch audit channels. However, as a form of citizen journalism, I would quite literally go to battle to protect their rights to do so. What I see as sometimes a waste of police resources aside, I would rather a world where this kind of content is legal and permitted than one where we were not allowed to scrutinise the authoritative structure around us. On that subject of wasted police resources, this is my personal opinion, but it does make me angry to see officers held up and time and money wasted dealing with someone who just wants to fly a drone over a police station whilst wearing a balaclava. I would much rather those officers were out dealing with urgent calls within a system which is, in my opinion, under-resourced and already stretched. Remember, the interactions you see on YouTube and social media between audit channels and police and security represent a tiny fraction of the number of drone flights happening on a daily basis throughout the UK. So, in my opinion, it does not represent how police will deal with you. It does not represent, as well, the attitude of the average drone user in the UK either. That's a message for the police out there. So do I think the audit channels will ruin the hobby? No, not directly. But I do think there could be impacts on drone use that are not necessarily the ones we see coming. Before you go, please hit that subscribe button if you are new here. And here is a video that YouTube thinks you're going to like next. Were they right? Sean out.